And it's to point now where the military is looking to use AI to control these weapons and control the responses because it's too fast for a human. Where it starts to get as scary is the idea of AI controlled war. And people, in Romans, it talks about people being inventors of evil things. This is one of them. And so there's a scripture in Revelation that says that there's these breastplates of fire, these figures that John saw. And in verse 18, it says, by these three were the third part of men killed by fire, by smoke, and by brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. Their power is in their mouth and in their heads, and their tails they were like serpents, and with the heads they do hurt. Now, there are prophecy teachers and so forth that used to say decades ago that this is like nuclear war and nuclear missiles. It may or may not be, because the nuclear missile definitely has a tail, which is the exhaust, and then the head, it does hurt. Yeah, the warhead is called the warhead for a reason. This is something that's feasible, although not certain. And feasible, meaning that we had these nuclear non-proliferation treaties ever since the 1950s. But recently, China tested a hydrogen bomb that is not nuclear. So it doesn't really fall into the restrictions around the SALT treaties and all these nuclear weapons proliferation. And these are massive, massive weapons. They're called air fuel, and they're huge, very, very destructive. They also have what are called hypersonic missiles. And these hypersonic missiles have gotten up to 20 times the speed of sound. They can hit any place on Earth within 30 minutes. So here is the scenario. It's also threatening U.S. power into Pacific. So the U.S. is worried about this sort of stuff because China seems to be far ahead in this area. And also Russia has them too. They've used them in Ukraine, these hypersonic missiles. And they can carry nuclear or very heavy, or these non-nuclear warheads on them, multiple of them. Now, where's the problem? It turns out that back in 1980s, right, we heard about the Cuban Missile Crisis where it only went to nuclear war in JFK and Russia, and then Russia backed down. Well, what's not really advertised as much is that there have been other incidents since then. In particular, in the 1980s, the Soviet missile detection system detected a nuclear launch from the U.S. It was an ICBM, and then it detected 5 more nuclear launches. It turns out that the guy that was in charge in Russia of this response was going to report it up the chain, and he didn't. And he said, well, if the U.S. was really going to launch something, they'd launch more than 3 or more than 5 or 6. And so he didn't report it. But it turned out about 11 months later, there was a NATO situation where a missile had been shot that the Soviet detection system wrongly classified as a nuclear launch. And this went up to the premier of Russia, who was Yuri Andropov at the time, and he rolled out his nuclear tanks to launch positions. He had his nuclear bombers ready to launch. And it turned out that it was a false alarm. He got that word in time, that it was a false alarm. And it turns out that this has happened at least a dozen times of almost using nuclear weapons. Now, back to this. When we're looking at things like hypersonic missiles, there were like a few days, hours to respond. With a hypersonic missile, you have 30 minutes. And it's to point now where the military is looking to use AI to control these weapons and control the responses because it's too fast for a human. Now, suppose AI makes a response. Some AI gets a false alarm or has a hallucination. AIs make up stuff sometimes. Suppose they have a hallucination that someone like Russia is shooting off bombs toward the Bay Area off the coast, and they only have a few seconds to respond, and then the AI just starts shooting off weapons. That's a possible scenario, right? So this is something that is dangerous and that people are moving towards, and it is a feasible scenario. That doesn't mean it'll happen, Lord willing, it won't. But you can see how this could definitely be feasible, especially when we've had a dozen close calls from 1962 to 2002.